Resto-Mod 101.
How to install a C2 Corvette rear disc brake conversion kit. Brought to you by Corvette Central. Welcome to Resto-Mod 101. Today we're going to show you how to put a rear disc brake conversion kit into a C2 Corvette. Corvette Central sent us these amazing rear brake rotors, and they're already attached to these trailing arms. These things are so heavy duty, get it and pick it up. It's too heavy. Yeah, so they're pretty heavy duty. So our brake calipers, hoses, and our brake lines, all for the rear, and then of course, brake pads. Let's do this.
So first thing we're going to be doing is going around and just lubing everything up. You've got U-joints on the inner and outer of the half shafts, and a pivot point to the front of the trailing arm, your shock and your spring attachments. It's very important also to lube up the brake lines. Brake lines are probably, for some reason, they seem to get the rustiest. Kingpin nuts first, which is a safety feature the cars come with, and they're usually fairly cooperative coming off. So there's a number of these to take off on both sides of the car. It's easy to grab with wire cutters and just to work them out. Just kind of thread it out like a needle. There'll be one also on the camber rod. The spring has a natural arch to it. When it's hooked up to any car to support the rear end suspension, the spring's brought up. As soon as you loosen the bolts, the spring's going to go back to its natural position with a lot of force. So we're going to be using a jack to support it up, keep it from damaging us, hurting us, or damaging the car. What we like to do for safety, being, like I said before, the arch of the spring being such a curve, and keeping the jack from slipping, we put a vice grip on there so the bottom of the jack will actually stay solid on it and not slip off. Usually I like to put it right against the leaf to keep it from slipping. Get it adjusted real tight. Double check it for slippage. Put the jack underneath it. Without this vice grip, and I jack this spring up with this jack, as I lower it, the jack's going to start to slide inwards. So the lip of this jack right here is going to catch on the vice grip, and it's going to keep it from flying and keep the spring from springing down too quickly. So I have control over how I get to lower the speed of it. We're going to need some extra weight to hold it down. So I'm going to have my coworkers stand on top of here and help out with a little bit of the difference in the weight. Please step up there, Felix. Watch your head. There you go, you all right? Okay, let's see if we can get this going, you all right? Okay, the nut and the washer have come down. Remove the bushing and slowly release the jack. And we're good. All right, good job. The tension is going to be the same on this side because the mount is in the center of the spring. So only one side has gone down. You still have the same equal amount of pressure on the right side as you do the left side. We're going to put the vice grip on for safety. All right, there you go. So the vice grip's keeping it from sliding. And there we go. Now we're good. We're clear. If you can hold the inside of that nut for me, which is what size? 11/16?
11/16.
And the outside bolt is going to be a 5/8. If you do use air impact, be really slow with it. Don't just force it, otherwise you can snap it. Since it's rounded the flat spots on the nuts, we're going to use the vice grip to grab onto whatever meat we can get hold of and see if that works. Get it as tight as you can, and then twist it more and get it even tighter. Right. This is your only chance of getting it without having a torch. Here we go. Nope.
Heat it up.
Heat it up. Okay, again, safety first. If we're going to be torching, you always want to use a fire extinguisher for a backup. Sometimes even keep a 5-gallon bucket of water for the sponge.
Heat it up so it's red.
Yeah, heat it up till it gets nice and cherry red. It worked.
It works.
Awesome. Heat expands, cold will contract. This happens a lot on older cars. Feel like being in a Western. came off like it should. You got a washer that's holding it. Don't unscrew that if that's giving you a hard time. There we go. Should slip right off. Little on the worm side though. Next we're going to be taking the brake lines off again. Spray. Make things easier. The sizes are 3/8. You want to get yourself a nice angle and breaks loose nicely. One is needle nose. There's a C-clip holding on the line. This line right here. It's going to shape like a horseshoe. Just want to grab it, kind of work back and forth. Take that off. This line comes right out, and you're free. First thing I'm going to do is take the 4 bolts off, the 5/8 bolts going from the half shaft to the trailing arm. Again, that oil really comes in handy because you know these bolts haven't been removed in a long time. Now that we've got the outside disconnected, we're going to do some wrenching on the inside on the U-bolts. These are 9/16. Sometimes it spins like that. You might have to get a screwdriver, just put in between the half shaft just to hold it as a lock. Just to break them loose. But that spray shouldn't be too hard. Okay, as you remove the U-bolt, make a straight shot out, place it, spin everything to 180 degrees, do the same thing on the other side. It's always good to replace at least the lock washers with new fresh ones so the tension is as strong as it's supposed to be. Now that we've removed all the bolts on one end and the U-bolts from the other, we're going to pry this out. That's it. The job with the cam rod is exactly what it is. It shows the positive or negative camber of the rear wheels. So anytime you have any adjustments on the rear alignment, this is the rod, which is all right here, that controls your rear adjustment. What I'm going to do first is break loose this nut on the inside, back that out. And again, it's always good to use spray, even though it is broken loose. Okay, now that I've broken that loose, it'll allow it to pivot down and keep us clear so we can get to this last unit. So I'm going to take off this little L bracket that holds the bottom of the shock normally, and we'll be good to go. Take it off with a 15/16 socket. And that's the easy part. The nut that we just removed, I'm going to place back on there, flush with this part of the bolt. The reason is I have to drive that bolt out, and I don't want to ruin the threads or crush it or mushroom it. So what I want to do is run this flat on the surface and take a large hammer and give it one good whack. Loosen it about 3 threads, tap it again. Loosen it, tap, light tap. And that should do it. That way you're saving the threads and you drive it out. Like that. Take a hammer. Should take 1 or 2 hits to drop it. And we're freewheeling right here, right, pivoting on the front bolt right here. There's bushings inside here that get corroded. The rubber usually makes almost like a glue. Sometimes it's a hassle. By taking all the weight off the back, once you remove that bolt in the front, just by shaking it up and down, it can break loose all that rubber and then it works itself out, which is another reason to save that for last. Turns out the nut is so rusted and stripped out, we're gonna have to heat it up first. Got the vice grip already adjusted for the outside. The inside's a 5/8 socket. If the body's on, you're gonna have to use an open end wrench, 5/8.
Yeah, I'll get the vice. Now you're coming
It's
up.
not doing it. So, our last option is just to take a torch, cutting torch, cut this end off here. Much easier to do now that the body's off the car. Here at the shop, fiberglass body, we've had to cut it off before with the body on, which is a lot more tedious. You have to cut the fiberglass behind it in the wheel well. It takes 2 guys, safety equipment, fire extinguisher, get in there with a cutting torch, cut it off, being very careful not to let the fiberglass catch on fire. Again, now that we've got the body off now, much easier process. There are rubber bushings in there that will catch fire, and it's good to keep the flames down. A little bit of water. Not turning at all. This is going to be a tough one. Okay, now that we've had to cut the nut off the bolt, I'm going to try to drive it through with this air hammer. Not doing it. All right. This is the worst case scenario on this car. Now it looks like we're going to have to come in from this side using the cutting torch, which is going to be a bit of a process. Cut the bolts hopefully on one side. I'll probably have both sides of the trailing arm and slip it out, which will render this trailing arm no good anymore. There he goes. Okay, don't touch it. Woo! Smoking gun, if you will. But you can see how solid that bolt was through there. It was just frozen inside the trailing arm itself. So those of you with 63, 64 setups, you won't be cutting these. You'll be using the tool to disconnect it on the inside and exchange for your trailing arm. Those of you that are updating, you're not going to be using this cable setup anyway. It's obsolete. Cut it, make it easy. There you go. It's like birthday.
One of those trick candles that didn't go out.
One of those trick candles.
Greg, what do we got next?
Okay, now we're going to be reinstalling the new trailing arm, the keeper bolts coming through the front here. Once we get that anchored in there, we'll slip in some shims.
Okay.
Then we'll bring it up. We'll start hooking up the camber rod, which is this unit right here.
Okay. So when you slide this first in here, the bolt goes right through this.
It does. It comes from the
here,
inside coming out.
Okay, so push the bolt in through this side.
Right. Now when the body's on there, usually you have to use some long needle nose pliers to get in there, but it's not too difficult.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
All right, I'll let you get to work.
Alrighty. First thing you want to do whenever you have a new trailing arm is make sure that the bolt does fit through the hole. I've had them too tight before. This one moves very cleanly through there, just the way it should. You want to feed it through just a little bit. Give yourself enough room to get the nose of the trailing arm in there. Catch your hole. Bring it through. You got a pretty heavy unit here. Let's take a jack stand, maybe with a rag. Lift it up just to support the back. Keep all the weight off the nose. Use your washer, the castle nut on there, and just get it started. What I also like to do is put new shims in there. Get these from Corvette Central. Usually I'll put even shims on the inside and on the outside of the trailing arm. Usually I try to get 2 fat ones and 1 thin one on each side. The shims are designed they're slotted. The bolt that we just installed, you can just slide in there, lock in, then they'll drop down inside the frame. So once you get one side in, slide the trailing arm over, give yourself room for the outside shims. 2 fat, 1 thin. You can do 2, maybe all 3 at one shot. And if you have any extra room, spare room, which we do in this case, start adding 1 to each side. That way they stay even. We're going to go a thin on each. Just keep going back and forth, and we're pretty solid there. The dialing in will be done by the alignment shop. They'll either add some or remove some from the inside, move them to the outside, or the other way around, just to get the car running true. Socket and an end wrench is what's needed. Usually a little spray I like to put on bolts also. Makes things work a lot easier, especially on the older cars. They've been sitting a while. It always frees up the rust that's in between the threads. I'm going to go ahead and just bring up the half shaft. Sometimes I have to pull it out a little bit. Line up your bolts with your threads and get them all started before tightening anything up. If you're using the same bolts that you were, always change out the lock washers. .5/8 socket is all you need. Tighten up the bolts evenly. It's going to suck in the trailing arm as you tighten them. That's another reason why I like to support the back of the trailing arm. Not to do a crisscross pattern, just like you do it with a carburetor. Everything's even that way. Once you got them snug, you're going to come back later and torque everything down. Always double check your work. Camber rod's going to be connecting to the bracket that's attached already to the bottom of your rear end. When you do install these, if your rear leaf spring's off, you got to make sure that the bolt's coming from the front to the rear. Otherwise, if you have to remove the camber rod, the spring will be in the way. You won't be able to remove this bolt to drop the camber rod. So go from front to rear. You have these two washers, they're spacers. They'll go on each side as you slip it into the bracket. Get your bolt ready. Have a hammer ready also. Sometimes you have to massage it a little bit, give it a little influence coming in. Feels pretty close. This is what I usually use to center the hole. Otherwise it's kind of hard when you're trying to get the bolt in there and you have some interference if it's not quite lined up all the way. Just kind of stick it in there, move it up and down, kind of go in a circular motion. Feels pretty good. Take your bolt and replace it. The adjustment can go either up or down. Lock washer and a nut on the inside, but leave it loose. So you still have some play here. You can adjust the side. Okay, we're installed here now. On the outside, this will be your shock mount also. On this angle part here, this part here will be holding the outside of the camber rod. The flat side is going to be on the bottom. I don't know if you can see it here. As I hold it to you, it's curving to your right. This is going to be the driver's side, the left side. So it's mounted in there, the flat side's on the bottom. Inside your trailing arm, there's a flat spot, which is like a keyway. I was going to let you know which side's left and right. Just like we did on the other side, find your hole, run it through, kind of do a nice circle with that. Make sure everything's where it should be. This side turned out real nice. Sometimes you want to oil this or grease it. Then remove the jack. Once you drive this in, make sure you're flush all the way around this area here. Using your flat washer and your castle nut, you're going to be slide them on there. And you'll be putting the cotter pin in there when you're all done. Okay, now that we've installed the camber rod on the inside, left it loose, connected it to the outside now, we're going to go ahead and tighten everything up. You're only going to want to get these things snug for now, because you're still going to have to hook up the spring. And you do want this camber, or you do want the trailing arm still to be movable for this spring to be hooked up. A lot of tension on that spring. So just keep these kind of snug, and always, like I said before, I can't stress it enough, always double check your work. That side of the shock always goes up. We got a new bolt kit we're going to be installing. I usually like to install the top side first. Again, with the body on there, it's a little bit more difficult. All this has to be done from underneath. It's real nice that the guys at Corvette Central have all these parts. If you can get the new setup, it's a way to go. Again, you're going to be using a hole finder. This is sometimes a little bit more difficult because the shock is on a little bit of an angle. You don't want to hammer it too much. You don't want to hurt the threads on the bolt. The bolt has to come from the outside in, because if the body was on the car right here, there's no way that the bolt will be able to clear the body to remove the shock. So always come from the outside in. Once you got that through there, with the body on again, it's a little more difficult. You have to, I mean, literally your opening is about 1.5 inches. You'll have to squeeze your hand through here, lock washer, and then the nut. The nut is a special nut. It's thinner than most nuts for just that reason. So it's a special bolt and nut for this top mount of your shock. Okay, the bottom side of your shock is going to mount down here to the bottom, the L bracket that you installed for the camber rod. Again, that's why you have your trailing arm loose. Just bring that shock up to the hole and slip it in. Just like that. Take a large washer, slide it over, and using the nut, special nut is a wide nut. Always use that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and tighten this bottom bolt for the shock. Okay, once you get that snug on there, you're going to come back and tighten the top one. You never want to tighten one more than the other. And this is just for assembly reasons. Once you're all done, you're going to always come back and double check your nuts and bolts, make sure you got everything tight. There we go. So we're going to touch the soft line first. There's no washer or anything on there, just screws right in there. This end here attaches to the bracket on the trailing arm. It's got little notches to keep it from spinning. The keeper, which almost looks like a horseshoe, slips on here. Give it a little tap of the hammer. Make sure you're getting solid. Then you're ready to install your hard line. Hard line, you're just going to put on finger tight. You want it movable. So this area here, you'll be able to put on the caliper, attach it, and then go back and tighten this on both ends. Now that we've got everything hooked up, got our half shaft or shock, I'm not going to hook up the spring until I get that side installed too, so that it comes up evenly. Okay, we just finished this side up, so now we're going to be installing the spring bolt, which is going to be mounting from here, trailing arm down to the spring. You're going to have to use a jack for that. You need some weight on the car. In this case, we don't have a body on the car. It's not going to be enough weight to hold the body down or the frame down. So we're going to have to be doing that later. What I like to do is also always get the new bushings. You're in there anyway, you must spend a couple nickels, go get the new bushings, and they'll last for years afterwards.
All right, so what do we have left?
Okay, what we're going to be doing is installing our calipers, but before we do that...
Can I check that out?
Yep.
Ooh, that's heavy.
4-piston caliper, this unit here. And there's a difference between left and right side. The Zerk that injects the fluid for power brakes is always to the inside of the rear. So in this case, this will be the left rear. So it's going to sit this way. This is the left rear. The line comes this way and in.
So the line in is always to the back?
To the back.
And to the inside?
And to the inside, correct.
Got it. Now, is there an inner and outer pad? Is there a difference?
On some pads, depending on the manufacturer, there's a squeaker, much like your front brakes. On this brand, there isn't. The squeaker will always go to the inside part of the caliper.
Oh, okay.
Also, that includes the front also.
Got it.
So that's a pretty easy process. The rears are easy.
Sounds good. All right, I'll let you get to work.
Alrighty. Simply slide out the cotter pin, slide out the pin. You have 2 pads. Take the first pad, place it against the 2 pistons that are on the outside or the inside, doesn't matter. Slide it through. Second pad, always have the pads facing each other. You don't want the backing facing the inside. You want the padding facing where the rotor will be. Slide that all the way through. And then you're going to reinstall your cotter pin. Before I do that, let me show you how that looks. Slide the cotter pin back in. Spread it apart just a little bit. Keep it from releasing. And we're good to go. Okay, Now that we have the calipers set up with our pads installed, we're going to install them on the rotor. Again, there is a left and right side. Part where the line's going to be for the fluids, always to the inside rear. Make sure your line's moved away a little bit. This one's fine. You're going to spread the pads apart, which is real easy by hand, and just compress the pistons. And that'll make room to slide over the rotor. You can also use a tool that spreads the pads, which is just like works as a scissor. As you tighten it, it'll spread apart. As you loosen it, it'll come back together. That'll also help you assist installing this. Next is going to be installing the 2 bolts to hold the caliper. They're both 5/8. What I like to do is install new lock washers. There's one in the front and one in the rear. Once you get them installed, just keep them finger tight until you get all your line hooked up. This takes a little maneuvering. Second bolt. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and tighten these up. Get them snug. Tighten the front one. Go back to the rear, tighten it up. And you're good. Okay, on the rear brakes you have 2 brake bleeder valves. Whether you're pressure bleeding your car or just pumping the brake, always start on the rear, the farthest point away, so that'll be the right rear. You'll pump up with pressure, loosen the zerks, bleed them out, tighten them, then go to the other side, tighten those, go to the right front, tighten that one after you bleed it, and the left would be your last. Now that we have the caliper tight, we're going to go ahead and hook up the brake line. Slide your fitting in. Making sure, again, I can't emphasize this enough, that line has to be perfectly straight going in. Line wrench has an opening for the line to slide through and tighten it. So it actually gets a better torque on the unit rather than just using an open end wrench. If you feel any resistance, take it back out. That means you're beginning to cross thread it. Start giving it a couple turns. If it moves freely and you can see the threads going inside, you have it correct. Start with an open end wrench. Get it a little bit snug. Again, go back to your line wrench. Simple as that.
Resto Mod 101.